You've seen it before, a kid who's never even seen a snake in person, yet they're paralyzed with fear at the mere mention of it. It's as if they inherited their parents' phobia, like a dark family heirloom passed down through generations. Can it really be that simple, that our deepest fears are encoded in our DNA, waiting to be triggered? A staggering number of people seem to think so, and scientists are starting to take notice. Imagine being able to pinpoint the exact moment when a fear was born, and then passed down to you. It sounds like science fiction, but what if it's not? What if the fears that haunt you today were actually born in your parents' minds, decades ago? The idea sends a shiver down your spine and raises a question. Can you really inherit fear? You've probably met someone with an irrational fear of spiders or snakes, right? Maybe it's you. Well, here's a staggering fact. 70% of people with those phobias have a parent who's terrified of the same thing. That's not just a coincidence, that's a pattern. Imagine being so afraid of a harmless spider that you can't even look at a picture of one, and then finding out your mom had the same paralyzing fear her whole life. What's going on here? Is it just learned behavior, or is something more complex at play? The numbers are compelling, and they're driving researchers to dig deeper into the mysterious link between inherited trauma and learned behavior. But what does this mean for the millions of people living with these debilitating phobias? You've probably heard stories like this before, but there's one case that really stands out, a woman named Sarah, who developed an intense fear of enclosed spaces virtually overnight. It started when her mother recounted a harrowing story of being trapped in an elevator as a child. Sarah's mom was just a kid at the time, stuck in a cramped elevator with no way out. As she told the story, her eyes would widen and her voice would shake, like she was reliving the whole ordeal. Sarah listened, entranced, and something about that story just clicked. She began to feel a creeping sense of dread in small spaces, like she was trapped too. Now, Sarah avoids elevators, tight corridors, anything that might trigger that suffocating feeling, and it's like her mom's fear has become her own. So what's happening in Sarah's brain that's making her mom's story feel so real? It turns out, when we recall a frightening event, the same neural pathways light up as when we experience it firsthand. It's like our brain is reliving the fear, and that's key. See, emotional memories get stored in a special part of the brain called the amygdala, which is basically a fear library. And when we hear a scary story, it's like we're filing away a new memory in that library, right next to our own fears. But here's the weird part. Research suggests that this filing process can actually change our brain chemistry, making us more sensitive to certain fears. And that's when things start to get really interesting, because it seems that our stress hormone cortisol is the key player in this whole process. You felt it before, that rush of anxiety when you're faced with something scary. Cortisol floods your system, preparing your body to fight or flee. But what's really fascinating is that cortisol can also rewire your brain's fear circuitry in a matter of seconds. Imagine a single traumatic event, like a car accident, triggering a cascade of chemical changes that can be passed down to your kids. It's like a fear switch gets flipped, and suddenly they're more prone to anxiety too. Scientists have even found that cortisol can affect the way our genes are expressed, essentially turning fear genes on or off. And that raises a haunting question. What exactly are we passing down to our children when we experience trauma? So if fear can be inherited, can we also pass down the ability to cope with it? Can we inherit resilience? It's a tantalizing prospect, especially for people struggling with anxiety disorders. Imagine being able to break the cycle of fear that's been haunting your family for generations. But what does this mean for treatment options? Do we need to rethink our approach to therapy, focusing not just on the individual but on the entire family tree? The stakes are getting higher, because if we can inherit fear, we may also be able to inherit the tools to overcome it. And that raises the question, what if we're not just fighting our own fears, but the fears of our parents and theirs? You're basically fighting a ghost army of inherited anxieties. Every new discovery brings us closer to breaking free, But the fear itself is like a living thing, adapting and evolving to stay one step ahead. Therapists and researchers are in a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, trying to outsmart the fear before it mutates again. The more we learn, the more we realize how deep this fear is rooted, spanning generations and continents. It's like trying to cut down a hydra. Every time you think you've made progress, two new fears sprout up in its place. And the question still lingers. Can we really overcome the fears that have been passed down to us, or are we doomed to repeat the same patterns forever? Now that you've faced the ghosts, you start to notice them everywhere, like a faint hum in the background of your life. You see how your friends and family members have their own inherited fears, passed down like heirlooms. Your coworkers' irrational dread of spiders, your sister's fear of public speaking, they all have stories behind them, stories of parents and grandparents who lived through trauma and hardship. You start to wonder, can you break this chain, or will you pass on your own fears to your kids one day? You look at old family photos and the faces stare back, their eyes holding secrets and terrors. And you realize the ghosts that haunt you are not just yours, but a legacy that echoes through generations, a whispered warning. What you fear, your children will fear too. You look at your own fears and you wonder, are these really mine? Or are they echoes of someone else's terror passed down through the years? The line between inherited and learned blurs and you're left with a haunting sense of continuity. You see your mother's face in your own and her fears staring back at you. It's a legacy of anxiety, a ghostly inheritance that whispers you are not alone in the darkest moments. And in that whisper, you hear the terrible truth. I am my mother's fear, and my mother's fear is me. In the silence that follows, you realize that freedom from fear